I guess I would have said burying my child was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do until I saw those photos and saw what happened to her.
Why would anybody want to share such horrific, graphic pictures with other individuals?
Car wrecks are common. What makes a few of them live on is a mix of shock, uncertainty, and public consequence. The 5 stories you're about to hear span personal tragedy and mass disaster. A young woman whose death was turned into a meme by strangers. A mother who drove the wrong way at highway speed with 5 children on board. A 20-year-old ejected onto a freeway sign in a scene that looked unreal even to first responders. 2 linked crashes at the exact same Alabama church, 3 days apart, and a fog event on North America's busiest highway that became a chain fireball with 87 vehicles. Together, they show how speed, ego, weather, and the internet can turn a few seconds into a lifetime of fallout. Nikki Katsurus was 18, creative, shy, in love with photography, and a brand new college routine. That Halloween afternoon felt ordinary. Lunch at home with her parents, a quiet suburban day. 10 minutes after her father left for work, Nikki did something she'd never done before. She took his Porsche 911 Carrera without permission. Her mother saw the taillights leave the driveway and immediately called her husband. He turned around and started searching. By 1:38 p.m., Nikki was flying south on the 241 toll road, reportedly over 100 miles per hour. During a lane change, she clipped a Honda Civic, lost control, crossed the median into oncoming lanes, and slammed into a concrete toll booth structure. The Porsche disintegrated. First responders, hardened by years of trauma scenes, were visibly shaken. Nikki died instantly. Her parents were not allowed to identify her body. The coroner said the condition was too severe, better to protect the family from a last image they could never forget. And that's where this story should have ended. Private grief, official paperwork, the slow work of healing. But days later, the internet, the wild, early viral internet of 2006, found them. Crash scene photos taken by California Highway Patrol as part of the investigation leaked. At least 2 employees admitted mishandling the images. What might have stayed in a case file jumped into inboxes, forums, and early social media. People posted them with fake tributes, cruel captions, and a nickname, Porsche Girl. Strangers taunted the family directly. One email arrived with the words, "Woohoo, Daddy. Hey, Daddy. I'm still alive." Nikki's mom stopped checking email entirely. Nikki's little sister was pulled out of school after a threat that the photos would be stuffed into her locker. The Katsurus family hired lawyers, sent takedown notices, begged webmasters, learned to use early search engine tools to bury links. But every time a photo disappeared, another copy surfaced. The leak didn't just violate privacy, it weaponized it, turning their dead child into a piece of shock content. Comment sections filled with people blaming Nikki, calling her spoiled, reckless, deserving. The family filed suit against the CHP for negligence and intentional infliction of emotional distress. An initial dismissal suggested the law hadn't caught up to the reality of viral harm. On appeal, a court ruled the family could sue. The conduct was morally deficient and foreseeably harmful. In 2012, the state reached a $2.37 million settlement. None of that deleted the images. Even now, they resurface, scraped by bots or reposted by people who never learned the story behind the shock. For the Katsurus family, the internet added a second crash to the first, a collision with a culture that too often treats grief as entertainment. Nikki's father later said he never wanted another parent to endure what they did. The lesson is not just about speed and a Porsche. It's about what happens when official images leak into a world that rewards cruelty with clicks. Why this case disturbs not only the violence of the crash, but the sustained aftershock, the way 2 employees' choices unleashed years of harassment, and how impossible it still is to get something back from the internet once the strangers decide it's theirs. Sunday morning on the Taconic Parkway, a line of minivans, families heading home from a lake weekend, one dog leaning into the wind. In one van sat Diane Schuler, 36, driving her brother's red Ford with 5 children. her 5-year-old son Brian, and her 3 nieces, 5, 7, and 8, plus her own 2-year-old daughter Erin. Her husband followed in a separate vehicle. They stopped for McDonald's. Witnesses said Diane seemed normal, ordering, paying, corralling kids. At a gas station, she asked for Tylenol. They were out. Later, she phoned her brother to say traffic was slowing them down. Then the calls and sightings began to stack. Drivers reported a minivan tailgating, honking, flashing lights, pulling onto the shoulder, a woman vomiting at a roadside pull-off. At 12:58 p.m., 8-year-old Emma called her dad, panicked. "Aunt Diane can't see. Something's wrong." When her brother called back, Diane sounded confused, slurring, misnaming him. He begged her to pull over. He drove to meet her. By the time he reached the rest stop where she might have been, she was gone. At 1:30 p.m., Diane entered the Taconic, the wrong way. She headed south in the northbound lanes at over 80 miles per hour, blasting past oncoming cars whose drivers had seconds to react. At 1:35 p.m., the red van hit a Chevrolet Trailblazer head-on, pushing it into a third car. The kinetic energy at a combined closing speed of well over 150 miles per hour was unsurvivable. 7 people died at the scene. Diane, her daughter Erin, her 3 nieces, and the Trailblazer's occupants, Michael and Guy Bastardi, and their friend Daniel Longo. 5-year-old Brian survived with severe injuries. 1 niece briefly survived, dying later at the hospital. First responders found a broken vodka bottle in the wreckage. The toxicology report, released days later, ignited a firestorm. Blood alcohol content 0.19%, more than twice the legal limit, and high levels of THC indicating recent marijuana use. Diane's husband publicly rejected the results, asserting she never drank around the kids, never used drugs, suggesting a stroke or undiagnosed medical event. He funded additional testing. Results were consistent. Investigators concluded she had been drinking heavily that morning, and that impairment, not a sudden medical calamity, explained the wrong-way driving, confusion, and vomiting. For those who loved her, that answer was unbearable. They remembered a meticulous, loving mom and dependable co-worker, not a reckless drunk. For the Bastardi and Longo families, the science was insult atop unimaginable loss. Why had a stranger turned their lane into a deadly lottery? The crash changed law. New York's Child Passenger Protection Act, nicknamed Leandra's Law and bolstered by this crash's outrage, made it a felony to drive intoxicated with a child passenger. Public campaigns hammered a simple truth. Impairment doesn't always look like slurred speech and stumbling. Sometimes it looks like a soccer mom ordering breakfast, then getting on a highway she's driven 100 times and making one catastrophic, impossible to untangle mistake. What remains disturbing here is the human contradiction. Diane's image as ultra-responsible clashed so violently with the toxicology that even family split along fault lines. Some cling to a medical explanation, others accept the data and mourn the woman they thought they knew. The open question, what was happening inside her head in those last 30 minutes, has no satisfying answer. Only wreckage and a little boy who grew up with scars that testify louder than any theory. Why this case disturbs: the intimate betrayal of trust. 5 children relying on an adult, 3 strangers facing an impossible wall of metal, and the gnawing ambiguity that keeps families arguing long after the death certificates. Some crash photos look fake at first glance. The physics seem wrong. On a Friday around 7 a.m., commuters on Interstate 5 near Atwater Village braked to a crawl, not only because a small car had rolled up an embankment and disintegrated, but because a human figure lay draped across a giant green freeway sign, the kind that towers over lanes and tells you the next exit, Colorado Street. 20-year-old Richard Pananian from Burbank was driving to his first day at a collision shop. He loved cars. Witnesses said he was speeding, weaving, using the right shoulder to pass. He clipped a Ford F-150 going about 50 miles per hour. The impact sent his 2004 Ford Fiesta tumbling. Somewhere in the rolls, the hatchback opened or collapsed. Without a seatbelt on, CHP was firm on that detail. Richard was ejected at high speed and high angle, launched up and forward. He struck and came to rest on the overhead sign's catwalk, more than 20 feet above the freeway. Drivers thought it was a Halloween stunt. It wasn't. Firefighters shut down lanes, deployed a ladder truck, and worked for hours to retrieve him with care and dignity. A white sheet went up to shield the view, but thousands had already seen. Coroner's officials later listed multiple fractures. Toxicology would take months, but the immediate factors were clear: speed, aggressive maneuvering, and no restraint. To the public eye, it was the surreal position of the body that branded the case into memory, an image that felt like a movie matte painting. To his family, it was spiritual dissonance. Only 5 days earlier, Richard's relatives had participated in Matag, an Armenian Christian sacrificial rite, traditionally offering a lamb in thanks for deliverance from a previous danger and asking for protection from future harm. A cousin wrote on a fundraiser page that Richard's life had once been spared, and this ritual was meant to keep him safe. The same cousin also insisted that Richard always wore a seatbelt and had installed a 5-point harness for safety. CHP said plainly, no belt was worn in this crash. The contradiction cut. The cousin then wrote what many felt: if God was going to take him, why like that? Why as a spectacle that made strangers gawk and turn him into a freeway story? There's a temptation to look for meaning in physics, but physics offers none. Ejections follow momentum vectors and failure points. Speed plus angle plus a compromised restraint equals a trajectory that sometimes finds the one place a person couldn't possibly land. Investigators closed the roadway, reconstructed the sequence, marked gouges and yaw marks, measured crush profiles. The facts were brutally ordinary. Speed kills, belts save. What was extraordinary was the tableau, the way a routine morning served up a picture that felt like a hoax. Richard's family remembered a kind, unmaterialistic young man who liked to work with his hands, who had a first day to get to, who did not get there. A donation drive raised enough to bury him and keep the machines of grief moving. Funeral, obituary, food for guests. But those who passed the Colorado Street exit for months afterward couldn't help glancing up and seeing a ghost. Why this case disturbs: the impossible-looking aftermath that tricks the brain, the cliff edge between ritual protection and random violence, and the knowledge that one click of a seatbelt might have kept him on the ground, alive, telling a fast-driving story to co-workers at lunch. Riverside Baptist Church had stood for nearly a century. White steeple, brick walls, a landmark in a town of 2,000 people where everybody waves. At 1:30 a.m. on a Thursday, a call came in. A car had hit the church, and the building was on fire. By the time firefighters from Riverside and nearby Pell City had lines charged, flames were chewing through the sanctuary. Inside the car was 19-year-old Anthony Banks Jr. Investigators said he'd missed a sharp turn near the church, left the roadway, struck the structure, and ignited a blaze that took aerial support to finally smother. He'd turned 19 just 17 days earlier. His mother posted raw grief online and asked for help burying her child. Friends wrote about a cheerful kid who brought joy just by showing up. In a town this size, a death registers in concentric circles: family, classmates, the checker at the grocery store who remembers what candy he always bought. People gathered in the parking lot of the smoldering church and cried together. 3 days later, almost to the hour, sirens again. At 12:53 a.m. Sunday, police pursued a BMW X5 reported taken without permission by a family member. The driver fled. The chase ran the same curve, the same frontage, the same awful geometry. The SUV left the road near the charred church, hit a brick wall, caught fire. The driver was trapped, unbelted. She died at the scene. Her name was Jennifer L. Arellano Maldonado, 19 years old. She was Anthony's girlfriend. 2 teenagers linked in life and now in death at the same place 3 nights apart. Both crashes followed by fires that made it hard even to stand close. The church, once venue for potlucks and baptisms, was now a blackened framework, damaged further by the second impact. The mayor vowed to rebuild. The fire and rescue department posted condolences and a plea for patience as investigators did their work. In the comments, disbelief piled up. How? Why here twice? Was the second intentional? Was it grief, bad luck, a road design flaw, something else? Officials avoided speculation. They mentioned speed, seatbelts, mechanical possibilities, emotional distress. They said the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency and the local police were analyzing both events. In small towns, trauma doesn't disperse into the noise the way it does in cities. It sits in the same pews at Sunday service, if you still have a sanctuary to sit in. It lingers on the same corner where the flowers wilt and the candles stub out. Anthony's mother posted another tribute. Jennifer's relatives asked the public to stop judging a girl they didn't know. People recalled seeing them together at the gas station, laughing, heads bent toward the same phone. There's a superstition that places can hold energy. Rationally, roads just carry risks. But it's hard to tell a grieving congregation that the ground where they once prayed is just a stack of coincidences. The phrase, "near the ruins of the burned-down church," will live in both families' memories longer than any police report. And if you drive through Riverside at night, you might take that curve slower because you heard a story about it, and because you can still see ash where the grass hasn't grown back yet. Why this case disturbs? The eerie mirroring. Same curve, same hour, same building, same couple's two halves, plus the visual of a church in flames twice in one long weekend, forcing an entire town to fold heartbreak into faith. Sunrise over southwestern Ontario. Highway 401, the continent's busiest, hums with long-haul trucks, commuters, and minivans even on a Friday morning. Around 8 a.m., near the Manning Road overpass east of Windsor Airport, weather did what weather sometimes does. It lied. A low, dense fog blossomed from nearby fields and poured over the asphalt like smoke. No advisory pinged. The airport system failed to flag the event in time. Visibility went from clear to one car length. Drivers hit brakes. Some didn't. A tractor-trailer slowed. The rig behind couldn't. It jackknifed across lanes, creating a steel wall. In fog that thick, the concept of ahead collapses. A second impact becomes a third. A car tries to go around and finds another pile 6 meters on. Within minutes, 5 separate chain events interlocked into a single catastrophe. 87 vehicles tangled, stacked, and burning. Explosions followed. A police officer later called it a massive fireball. People crawled from shattered windows, ran from heat that blistered the paint on cars that hadn't even crashed yet. Others were trapped. 8 people died, 7 at scene, 1 later. 45 were injured, some grievously. Constable Lee Bailey, off duty, planning to skip out early for a ball tournament, answered the call. She saw a shimmer of mist lifting off fields, but didn't grasp the scale until she was reversing up the westbound ramp to get around the blockade. Dispatchers were baffled. "You're doing what?" It was the only way. At the top, she encountered a war zone. Crying, silence, metal groaning, then a concussion of a blast so close, a firefighter tackled her to the ground. She never learned his name. She remembers his weight and the taste of grit. A kilometer away, local lawyer Kirk Wallstedt heard the crashes while feeding his peacocks. Yes, peacocks. He and relatives ran to help, ferrying dazed survivors to a triage spot under a tree on family land. They made space on truck beds. They told people who could walk to sit. They told others they were sorry, help was coming. Hold on. Some they couldn't reach. Years later, Wallstedt, now a deputy mayor, still dreams about it. The Windsor Airport weather system's miss became a symbol of how thin the line is between routine and disaster. But the pavement carried blame, too. Built in the 1950s and 60s, this stretch had just 2 lanes each way, divided by a narrow grass median, with long, hypnotic flat sections that encouraged speed and boredom. Locals had already nicknamed it Carnage Alley. By September of 1999, 22 people had died on that segment that year. Days before the fog crash, a minister had called it pleasant to drive. The 1999 pileup forced a reckoning. A coroner's inquest made 25 recommendations. Lawsuits screamed for concrete barriers and more lanes. rumble strips, better shoulders, broader medians. The province embarked on a $322 million upgrade that took a decade, with cable barriers arriving in 2017, additional concrete in the 2020s, and work still ongoing. That's the unromantic truth of highway safety. It moves at the speed of budgets and contracts, while weather arrives at the speed of air. What people remember are details. A woman who couldn't be extricated, a loved one told there was nothing more rescuers could do, the goo of melted dashboards, the char of asphalt that had to be milled away, and the way fog erases the future, turning a horizon into a wall so suddenly that even good drivers end up in physics problems they can't solve. Why this case disturbs, not one family's nightmare, but dozens, multiplied by bad design, zero visibility, and fire. The kind of morning that turns a region's most routine road into a memorial list and keeps the word carnage stitched to an otherwise boring line on a map. Some crashes take a heartbeat. The consequences take a lifetime. 5 roads, 5 endings, and a handful of seconds that rewrote everything for the people left behind. If these stories stay with you, let them. Not as images to gawk at, but as warnings that matter when it's dark. You're late, and the easy choice is the fast one.